All right, say words now.
My heart will go on.
I feel like that's the only lyrics you know, too.
Yeah, really.
Welcome to VCR, on Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
And I'm Jason.
At this point, you're a regular, Mike. Welcome to the podcast.
Yay, good to be back.
Welcome to the podcast in the sense of welcome to being a regular on the podcast.
Oh, thank you.
So.
I passed my probation.
Yeah, exactly. That's sure one way to think about it.
So suck it, Jason.
Who will still be on regularly as well. So it's kind of nice having some interchange on the podcast. It feels more legit for some reason, having multiple correspondents on this show.
Like a rotating schedule.
Yeah, kind of. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just yeah. But anyway, so glad to have you back in full time. We got a big movie to talk about today.
A titanically big movie.
Yes, that is a great way to describe it. We're talking about the 1997 epic romance historical drama. Probably add 6 more descriptive word
There's
genre
quite a few
words.
qualifiers on there. Yeah.
From James Cameron himself. So you've never actually seen this movie?
Yeah, that was we were talking about what movie to do next, and just for whatever reason, this is one movie that just completely passed me by all these years.
Yeah.
I was the iceberg they didn't hit. Like, I just... I remember, actually, your sister... I remember hanging out in your basement, and your sister had the... like the 2 VHS box set, and I remember looking at it, and I think I even said to her, like, what's this movie about? And your sister said, it's a love story. And I went, ew, no, and I threw it away.
Yeah.
But, yeah...
Talk about one of those movies that changes as you grow older and mature. And I'm going to talk about that in my review a little bit more because I have an interesting relationship with this movie. I've always liked it. I saw this probably when I was like 10 or 13 years old for the first time.
Okay.
Like, not long after it came out on that 2 VHS tape.
Oh, those were the days.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. But it's a movie that it was extremely important at a time when neither you and I understood the importance of movies or culture. I don't think at that point, like, I don't think our brains were developed enough to understand how important a movie could be to the culture.
Maybe for the benefit of those listening, maybe we should just say I would have been 5 when this movie came out.
Yeah, and I'm about the same age at that point too.
So
yeah,
just young whippersnappers, not part of the dialogue.
Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking about, because you and I, we were looking at doing like a movie in the historic or biopic genres. Mm-hmm. And when I started doing my research on what movies I wanted to watch, I was looking at the list on the IMDb, like the top biopic movies. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of shocked, actually, because a lot of the top biopics are like, came out within the last 10 years, I would say.
Interesting.
And if you think about what came out like this year as well, we had we have upcoming the movie about Weird Al. We had Blonde, the movie about Marilyn Monroe. There was another one.
Elvis, that
was the big one this year.
We've also had a couple musical biopics in the last few years. Bohemian Rhapsody.
Rocket Man.
Yeah, Elton John.
Yeah.
So
it kind of got me thinking. This is an interesting tangent for the beginning of our episode. Mm-hmm. Like, it kind of surprised me, but then, like, I almost kind of wondered, are we in the period of the superhero and biopic movie in this generation? Is that the low-key big genre right now?
It might be, because, I saw a YouTube video came up on my feed where someone was complaining about Elvis, and the subtitle was like "The Crushing Mediocrity of Biopics" or something like that. So when nerds on YouTube start complaining about something, that means it's part of the zeitgeist.
Yeah, exactly. I was really thinking about that because it kind of put me into this like whole tangent about thinking about this movie and what we were gonna pick before we picked this movie even.
Not to cut you off, but I was about to say, would you call this a biopic? But I mean,
I don't think it fit. Well, that's hard to. Yes and no.
To me, a biopic is more focused on one person or maybe an influential group.
Yeah.
This would be a biopic about I guess, a historical event.
Yeah, that's kind of the genre that we were looking for, was historical or biographical.
Yeah.
And so this leans more into the historical, absolutely.
Like, this almost reminded me of Ben-Hur in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's that same level of epicness to it, too,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, so I kind of was thinking about the biopic stuff, and I kind of wonder if it's just because it's like an easily bankable person that you're putting out there that already has like a significant fandom. Because right now, Hollywood's kind of dependent on big movie franchises to sell tickets, right? Because you have to get people to the theater to make money on your movies now, because streaming isn't the same level of income flow as selling VHS tapes and DVDs, right? So I'm kind of thinking that is like the low-key decision that Hollywood has made in the last 10 years, that, you know, we don't have to tell original stories. We can just tell stories of already famous people, because there's enough people. If they're famous, they already come with like a pre-packaged fandom.
They're already a brand at this point.
Yeah.
Like, let's just capitalize on it. Well, I was listening to this thing today about how, obviously, because of the pandemic and other things going on, like, box offices have been lower than they've been in 20 years. Mm-hmm. And Hollywood is kind of, I mean, depending on who you ask, I think the point, I can't even remember who was telling this, but he was saying, like, you know, the biggest movies in the last couple of years have been these big budget, like, franchise epics, like Top Gun Maverick.
Right, and obviously the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, Marvel. I think even Marvel is starting to see a downturn, though.
Yeah, I mean, a downturn for Marvel is like, hey, we made $600 million instead of $800 million on this movie.
That's a good point.
So
we only bought 5 yachts instead of 12.
Yeah, exactly.
Jeez.
But anyway, that's just my little thought going into this movie and this genre. The other thing I want to talk about before we start with the Titanic is we just got through our draft video, which I had a ton of fun with. We recommended 9 movies, which most of us hadn't seen the other movies that the other person had talked about. So personally, at this point, I've watched one of your and Jason's movies. I've been watching a lot of movies lately, and most of them have been for the podcast. Okay. And with a movie like the Titanic, that is 3 hours and 15 minutes plus something else we're going to talk about in this episode as well, Avatar, which is also almost 3-hour runtime. I haven't had a lot of time to just like watch movies casually as well. Also, during October, I watch a lot of horror movies because I love that genre.
You're busy.
Yeah.
You're very busy.
Exactly. So I've only gotten to one of the movies on the draft yet, and that was your last film, actually, last night.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Yeah, and honestly, I really enjoyed it.
Nice.
It has like a TV movie feel to it, I think, in the production, and I kind of think that's just the Canadian production values, since it's a Canadian film.
You may have hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, like, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, I really enjoy the early 90s rendition of The Stand. Stephen King's big, massive book adaptation that's like 3 or 4 parts. Same with the It adaptation is pretty cool from back then as well. Okay. Maybe a little dated, but still, it kind of gave off that vibe. Interested in the production quality, but in the terms of like the story and the conversations, I really connected with it like a lot. Like, I really, really enjoyed it. The performances are like pretty decent, but it's really the story and the human connections that each of the character has with one another, and like the individual dialogue and relationships that each character has, and how each person is dealing with the end of everything that we know kind of differently, right?
I think I was saying it's a surprisingly uplifting movie considering the subject matter.
Yeah. Like, it was.
I left that movie feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though, spoiler alert, the world ends at midnight.
Yeah, exactly. Which is not so spoiler alert, because that is literally the whole topic of the movie.
That's right. That's the premise.
Wouldn't it be crazy, though, if it just didn't end at the end of the movie and everyone was just like, oh, shit.
That might actually be a better ending. I mean, how many times throughout history has some asshole predicted the apocalypse only to...
Oh my God.
For it
Countless
not to
times.
have happened?
Yeah.
I remember like in 2011 getting like a pamphlet in the mail about how the apocalypse was about to happen, all that stuff.
I like the ambiguity too to how the end was going to happen. Like, you really didn't know like why the end of the world was happening. There's kind of hints maybe throughout the film.
There's an implication.
Yeah.
I won't say what it is for anyone who might check it out.
Yeah, you and I have to talk about it separate, I think, because I'd like to see if my understanding is the same as your understanding.
Okay.
But that's for another discussion. Maybe we'll even do that movie on this podcast sometime, because I really enjoyed it.
I'd love to, yeah.
What about you? Have you seen any movies yet?
Yes, I watched your favorite movie, Network.
Nice.
So, yeah. Unfortunately, I was a little lukewarm on it.
Yeah.
Compared to the blistering hot passion that you had for it.
I still have that blistering hot passion for it.
I will. The premise of the movie is it's a newscaster who gets fired, essentially, and he tells everyone he's going to shoot himself on the air, and everything kind of springrolls from there. I actually got laid off from my job, I think a couple days before I watched it. So maybe having let's say, an unexpected career shift right before watching that movie didn't do it quite the service it should have.
Yeah, you probably would have looked at the character of Robert Beale a little differently, come in with a different perspective, right, than you're supposed to.
Maybe almost relating to him too much.
Yeah.
As opposed, which sounds weird. I related to this protagonist too much, but
it's also understandable when you watch the movie
because
he's more of a tool than a protagonist. Like,
yeah, especially kind of after the halfway point, not getting into spoilers.
Yeah.
Something happens where you're like, I don't know what this guy's doing. So, yeah. I will say, though, I think we do owe it a full episode on this podcast, and I absolutely owe it a second watch. And I will say, the thing I did really admire about it, despite all that, was the dialogue. Easily some of the most razor-sharp, articulate, even poetic dialogue
absolutely
I've ever seen.
And what's okay, I'm not, you know what, I could talk about this movie for literally 2 podcast episodes probably, so I'm gonna cut myself off.
I will say maybe my favorite line from the movie is when Beale is letting it all hang loose and he's like, I was married for 35 years of shrill, shrieking fraud. It's like, oh, man.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's a great movie. There's some awesome dialogue. But anyway, that's not what this episode's about. We're doing the Titanic. James Cameron's one of his biggest films. And it's crazy that I can even say, like, this is one of the biggest films of all time. But he has, like, 2 of the biggest films of all time on his resume.
The fact that you could say one of his biggest films is kind of...
with a movie of this much importance.
Kind of a mindfuck when you actually think about it.
Yeah. So you want to get started with the plot? Do you have a brief plot summary you want to talk?
Sure, I can fire one out.
Sure.
Okay. So explorers have recently uncovered the wreck of the Titanic, the largest man-made moving object at that time that tragically sank due to a lot of different errors that were going on at the time. So anyways, Bill Paxton stars as Brock Lovett, who is searching for a missing precious gem that is supposed to be on board the Titanic. So,
and when you say missing precious gem, it's worth like hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's quite a lot.
Yeah.
So I think they even say at one point it's like worth like 3 times the Hope Diamond or something.
I can't remember if they say that specifically in the movie, but the diamond itself is like actually not a real diamond, but based off of the Hope Diamond, which in and of itself is worth $300 million. So probably in that ballpark area.
Okay. So anyways, while excavating the wreck with his team, they open a safe. And instead of finding the diamond, they find a drawing of a beautiful naked woman with the drawing around her neck.
Yeah, with the the diamond around her neck.
Right.
Not the drawing.
Right.
Just like multiple drawings getting smaller and smaller around her neck.
Yeah, that would have been a much different movie, but...
It's like time-traveling Inception.
Yeah. We were 10 years out, at least, from that sort of storytelling. But, so... they share the drawing on the news, and a 104-year-old woman recognizes the drawing. She gets flown out to the ship, and she tells everyone that the woman in the drawing is her, and that she is actually an as yet undocumented survivor of the Titanic.
Her records don't align exactly with the records of the survivors of the Titanic or the people who were listed initially on its maiden and ultimate tragic voyage. And so we get into the story eventually about why she wasn't documented necessarily in the original list. Anyway, she begins to tell her story, and
here we go. And then it's Titanic. We meet Rose at 17. She's very, very, very upper class, back when very, very, very upper class was its own thing.
Still is, but just different then.
Yeah, hopefully not as stuffy. But
yeah.
Anyways, so she's an extremely intelligent young woman. She's familiar with the works of Picasso and Sigmund Freud, so she's, obviously extremely well-read for her time. Mm-hmm. She's engaged to Billy Zane. I forget his name.
Cal Hockley.
That's right, Cal Hockley. And you can tell he's the bad guy because of his hairline. If you have a receding hairline, you have to play the bad guy. Nice. But she's engaged to Cal. She's almost like a caged bird. Like, she's very, very oppressed.
She's a wealthy teenage girl who is basically on this trajectory of extraordinary wealth that her mom and her dad would have lived. Mm-hmm. And she sees the person that her mother is and wants no part in that. And then her fiance is again kind of this stuffy rich guy who
very overbearing.
Yeah, and very classist, very sexist as well.
There's a scene early in the movie where they're all dining in the dining room, and he literally orders for her. Anyways, things aren't looking good for Rose, and in a moment of despair, she decides to fling herself overboard. But fortunately, Leonardo Dicaprio as Jack is there to stop her.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of when we get into the story proper, or at least the first half of the story proper.
Yeah, and this is where the relationship between Jack and Rose starts, and the ill-fated love story that we get for the movie, which eventually leads us into the events leading up to the sinking of the Titanic and the actual events of the sinking unfolding in front of us, right. Which is quite traumatic to watch, to be honest. It's not an easy watch that last hour, but
it's essentially for the few of you who haven't seen it, it's a romantic comedy for an hour and a half, and then the ship sinks, and then it's a disaster movie for an hour and a half.
Yes, and it is the quintessential disaster movie.
Yes.
The story of the Titanic, which did sink in 1912, is pretty much the cap for disaster movies in film, and basically started the idea of it. Was obviously very famous at that time, especially as we're moving towards this globalization and everybody around the world is hearing about this, connecting about this together. It's kind of become one of those events in human history that's been forever, I don't know what the proper term is.
Immortalized.
Yeah, it's immortalized. It's something that will always be talked about for the rest of time.
It's like the Hindenburg disaster.
Exactly.
In the sense, it's almost like it's synonymous with disaster.
Exactly.
Or just things going wrong on a, pun intended, Titanic scale.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty good description. Characters and people you may know. You've already hinted on a lot of the characters that we were going to talk about. So Rose DeWitt Bukater is our heroine of the story, played by Kate Winslet. This film is really important for not only what it covers, but for the career trajectories of its two main stars. And so Kate Winslet, for this movie, this is her top of the top movies of all time.
And not to cut you off, but I would argue that this is essentially her movie.
Yeah,
she's essentially the real protagonist of this film.
Absolutely, she is. And as I'm older and watching this film, I really appreciated her portrayal of the character. Say what you want about Leonardo DiCaprio, she might steal the movie. Like Leo's got this like personality that's like so genuine and like lovable, but her conflicted like personality between where she's going in life and where she wants to go in life is just, it's so relatable. And I feel like you can see yourself more in her than anybody else in the film.
In a way, she's almost extremely more competent and likable than he is. In a way, not to say he isn't competent and likable, but like there's jumping ahead a bit. There's a scene where she's walking around on the deck with the helmsman or something, or the architect or something, and she points out like, hey, I just noticed there aren't enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Like she's like, I've already mentioned, she's familiar with Picasso, she's familiar with Freud, like, you know, she's incredibly like savvy and like keen.
Yeah, and has an appreciation for the world and culture and everything going on around it. Like, she's very cognizant of everything going on around her. I really attached myself to her in this viewing that I don't think I did before when I was younger watching this film. Leonardo DiCaprio is like the biggest star in the world right now, in my opinion, in movies. Like
not always for great reasons, but yeah.
We won't talk about his relationships with young women beyond this sentence in this episode. But anyway, yeah, he's playing Jack Dawson, the poor American artist traveling through Europe who wins these last minute tickets onto the Titanic. So him and his buddy get this essentially free ride onto the Titanic. But this is, again, one of the most iconic Leonardo DiCaprio roles, and also maybe the most important role for his career trajectory as well.
I think this was easily his star-making role. I know
This is, absolutely.
He did a couple of movies before this, but this was definitely the DiCaprio movie of its time.
And I have more to talk about the legacy a bit later. Our other characters, so you've already talked about Rose's mother and her fiance, Cal. The other character relating to Cal is his kind of bodyguard henchman guy, Spicer Lovejoy, who executes his will. There's a lot of historical figures. So all the characters that we just mentioned aren't actual historical figures of the Titanic. But James Cameron, the director, put a lot of time and effort into actually adding in all of the real historic characters from the actual sinking of the ship. Like, I'm just going to mention a couple of them that are important, and then you and I will probably end up discussing them in a little bit more detail. I was actually doing a bit of a review of the Titanic itself and all the characters. On Wikipedia, they actually separately list all of the historical characters that were in the movie, and also, like, real-life characters.
That's convenient.
And you legit have to scroll down to read all of the characters and their stories. And it's really cool as well, and this is probably further reading if anybody's interested out there, is each of the people that are played potentially have their own Wikipedia page, and if they don't, they have brief descriptions in the list of historical characters about who they were and what their fate aboard the ship was.
It was quite the cast of characters on board that ship.
Absolutely, yeah, it was huge. So I can't remember how many speaking parts there were, but it was like 100 or something like that in the film. It was quite large. A bit,
yeah.
So a couple of characters that I was going to mention were the unsinkable Molly Brown, played by Kathy Bates. This is a career highlight for Kathy Bates. Really like her character. She plays the new money wealthy woman on the ship who is kind of in the same social circle as Rose's mother, but Rose's mother and her friends kind of look down on her because she's not like the other wealthy people. She kind of sees the world from a different viewpoint, and she's not as stuffy as
she's got a real salt of the earth attitude.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And she's pretty sympathetic towards Jack and Rose throughout the film as well. You can really also empathize with her character often, and she's kind of the hero in several scenarios or situations.
There's one moment where Jack gets invited to like a fancy upscale dinner, and you know, she kind of pulls him aside and says, like, what are you wearing?
Yeah, and she goes out of her way to help him.
Yeah, and he's like, I don't know what I'm wearing right now. She's like, oh my God, you're wandering into a den of vipers. She's like, I'm pretty sure you're my son's size. Let's see if I have something for you. Like, she really goes out of her way to help this poor kid.
Yeah, exactly. So she's important to the film in several different plot points. There's a few other characters related to the Titanic as well that are important. There's Captain Smith, who is the captain of the ship. Thomas Andrews, who's the ship's builder, basically the architect of the whole ship, and very proud of the development of the Titanic. Bruce Ismay, who is the managing director of the ship and the company that owns the ship. And he's, again, kind of one of those snooty, the mustache guy.
Got a very distinct mustache.
Yes, very distinct mustache. So those are kind of the other big characters. There's, like I said, you can scroll through the list of historical characters online because there's 100 of them probably in this film, or close to 100 of them, and many other stories from that night are also included in this film in little appearances here and there. The only other character that I was going to mention was you also mentioned Bill Paxton, one of my favorite supporting actors of films.
Really good character actor. Yeah,
very good character actor. Yeah.
Also he appears in a lot of disaster movies now that I think about it. Remember Twister?
Oh, yeah, he did appear in Twister. He was also in Apollo 13. He was in Aliens, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. Game over, man. Game over.
Oh, shit. That was him?
That was him. Yeah.
Oh, man. I got to watch that movie now.
It's fantastic. You've never seen Aliens? Oh, yeah, you haven't.
I've seen Alien number 1.
It's such a different tone than the original. And
that's what I've heard.
It basically takes on different genres than the first. There's still the horror elements, but there's also the action elements.
That's James Cameron too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
it
man.
is. I'm a big fan of James Cameron. So
okay.
And that's partially why I wanted to do this episode, because of the upcoming Avatar second movie, which we're gonna discuss a little bit later.
I will say I've enjoyed a lot of his movies. I don't think I've ever been a huge James Cameron fan, but I think after watching this movie and looking into the context a bit, I had a little moment where I'm like, okay, this guy's pretty talented.
Have you seen Terminator 2 Judgment Day?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah,
because that's another one of his career highlights. James Cameron is a very reliable filmmaker. He's never going to make a bad movie necessarily. Maybe you don't love all of his movie choices, but there's not really any bad movies in his filmography.
He's definitely, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this more later, but he definitely knows how to tell a compelling story. And when you were just talking about all these historical characters, I know he took the liberty of knowingly fudging the details on some of them just to make it more compelling cinema.
Absolutely.
And I respect that to a great degree.
Yeah, and there's some very big design choices that he made with several characters that potentially rub people the wrong way, like historians. But again, if you're trying to tell a compelling story, sometimes you do have to fudge with the historical facts of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing, which is awesome, is James Cameron's Canadian. I didn't realize
what?
That. Yeah, so another great Canadian filmmaker.
Okay, you're welcome, America.
Yeah,
but
Denis Villeneuve and James Cameron. We have two of the greats.
Okay, good for us. Also Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, not a filmmaker, but he's very, very relevant actor right now.
He's around.
So, who is this movie for?
That's a very interesting question.
So, I think that this movie has extraordinarily widespread appeal. The only box that I don't see necessarily fitting in is the box of children. As a kid, I didn't fully get what this movie was about and what this movie was trying to do, or maybe I just didn't care. And there's obviously the elements of there's some brief nudity. There's the obvious traumatic experience of the Titanic sinking.
Before we started recording, we were talking to your fiance, and she said, I watched this movie in grade 3. And we were both like, oh my God, they showed this to you in school? And she said, no, I was in grade 3 and I watched it at a friend's house. We went, oh, okay.
Yeah. Which I think all of us around that time had done that. Like you mentioned, we had the VHS tapes at our house. I think we borrowed them from a family friend or something like that.
Yeah, maybe.
And so we watched it, and as a kid, I was there's this romantic element, whatever. At the end of this movie, there's going to be a big disaster film part of this, and that was what I was excited about, and that's what I cared about. And so I missed seeing the forest through the trees here a little bit. And I think as a kid, you're not going to appreciate it as much.
Definitely not as a little boy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But as I'm older now, I don't want to spoil my review too much.
Okay.
But I did really enjoy this movie, just like as maybe a small mention of where I land on it. And I saw it in a very different light from when I had first seen it, or even like in 10 to 12 years ago when I saw it for the second time. I appreciated all of the different elements and how they came together, and how the different story elements were kind of all wrapped together, and how it made different aspects of the film important as well.
I definitely agree, and I'm sure we'll get into more of that later.
Absolutely.
But I will say how James Cameron presented this story was, he is one of the greats, and for good reason.
Yeah. What I almost want to recommend is, if you're a millennial like us and you haven't seen this movie since you were maybe in your early to late teens, like maybe you saw this when this first came out or a few years after, you're doing a disservice to yourself if you never watch this movie again. I think if you're solely relying on the initial thoughts you had and opinions you had of the film at that age or time in your life, I think you can go into this and get a lot more out of it than you did at that time.
I will say, as someone who has never really, well, not to change the subject, but like we've kind of talked about this before, maybe off camera, how when a movie becomes this big and this iconic, it's almost like you absorb so much of it through osmosis. Like people parody it, or like there's the memes. For the longest time, I didn't really want to watch this movie because I was just like, well, I kind of like, so many of the big pivotal moments have been parodied or spoiled for me.
Yeah, you're like, I get it.
Yeah,
I don't need to see it. I get it,
right? But I will say, as someone who cares about cinema and someone who's about to turn 30 and someone who's never seen it, I am glad that I experienced it for myself.
Awesome. Good.
Yes.
I'm glad to hear that. When you texted me and you were like, I have thoughts about this movie, I was like, this could go one of two ways. I think I can be happy to discuss both, but I'm glad to hear that you were happy that you watched it.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say maybe there were I do have complaints.
Okay.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But we'll get into that later.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think this film, because it's such a grand scale, and like we said before, like it fits to the historical genre, disaster movie. A romance is a huge part of this.
Oh yeah.
It's an epic, I think. I think you can classify this as an epic. It almost doesn't quite make the epic, but just the size of the ship and like the size of the human impact on this film, I think justifies it as an epic.
I think we can call it an epic. In fact, epic might be the most succinct way of putting it.
That's fair. And then lastly, obviously, it's a movie that takes place on a boat in the ocean. I like ship movies like the rest of everyone else, like Pirates of the Caribbean.
Okay.
The other major ship TV show that I watched recently is season 1 of The Terror, which I've told you about a number of times.
You lent me the book and I haven't read it yet.
Oh my God. I was wondering where that book went.
It's with me.
I loved that TV series so much that I bought the book that it's based on and read all of that. And then I read through as much as I could about the history of that online. I could tell you every little detail about those ships. Like, I don't know. It's a little bit fascination with disasters, like human disasters, and just and how people react in situations. But it's also a little bit just like, I find ships and seafaring really interesting and neat, and the human stories of early experiences on the ocean are very interesting.
There is something very there's something very almost mythic about it.
Yeah.
Like the chaos of the sea and traversing over it.
And how foreign it was to us for so long as well, right? And like, we still haven't explored most of the ocean.
We aren't meant to be at sea. We're barely meant to be on land.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's just so many elements of this film pulling from so many different genres that I think even if you don't, if you're not interested in the romance right off the bat, or if you aren't interested in like the historic background of the Titanic, there's going to be elements of this film that you can grab onto and really enjoy and enjoy for these 3 hours and 15 minutes, that it's worth your time to see, especially if you've never seen it before, especially if you saw it when you were really young and didn't understand it or didn't love certain elements of it.
Yeah, I will say, as someone who isn't necessarily interested in the romance angle or the historical angle typically, I was quite swept along by this movie. This is very much like Ben-Hur, just in the sense of how this is the kind of experience that only Hollywood can give you.
This is an event movie, a Hollywood event movie.
It's almost a lot like Star Wars in a way.
Yeah.
I almost feel like, we were kind of saying half facetiously, little boys won't like this movie or children won't like this movie. And yeah, maybe. But honestly, like, this is one of those rare movies where I say it's pretty much for everyone. And I don't mean that like dismissively.
Yeah.
It's essentially for everyone.
Yeah, it's essentially for everyone, but it wasn't made to be for everyone. If that kind of makes sense. Like, it's not something like a generic Netflix movie that it needs to be for the Chinese market and for the US market and for any other large market that we're trying to cater to right now. It's not for like, it's not a movie that you turn on in the background and text for, or like look stuff up online for 3 hours while you're watching it. Like, you're pretty engaged while you're watching it.
Yeah.
And it's not a formula movie that is trying to appeal to everyone and make as much money as possible. James Cameron set out to do something, and what the story that he wanted to tell just naturally appealed to everyone, and they didn't even know at the time that it was going to have this much appeal. They actually thought it was going to be a big failure.
Yeah, and maybe we can talk about the production a bit more later.
Oh, we definitely will.
This was one of the most famous troubled productions in Hollywood.
Yeah.
The fact that this movie even exists and that it's as good as it is sort of a miracle.
Yes,
we might be living in the only timeline where this movie is good, because so much went wrong.
Yeah, we've been living in some dark timeline stuff lately, so do yourself a favor and enjoy this one.
Yeah, you know what?
This timeline got it right.
Yeah, our timeline finally got a win.
Oh, that's awesome. When to watch? It's a 3 hour and 15-minute movie, so you obviously need to have that time set aside to watch this.
It also, I'm the kind of guy where if I get bored or distracted or something comes up, I will pause the movie and pick it up again the next day. This is really the kind of movie that benefits from one sitting.
I think so too. Like, I didn't actually write this down, but I was having the internal thought about, like, if you had to split this movie, where would you split it and watch it over 2 nights? And honestly, like, I almost didn't want to recommend that as well, because I think you're right. I think this deserves to be watched all in one go.
I think we could pretty much both easily point to a part where, like, okay, well, if we absolutely have to, cut it here.
Yeah.
But you're almost kind of, as much of a cliche as it might sound, this movie is more than the sum of its parts.
Absolutely.
So don't.
Yeah.
Don't cut it.
Yeah. If for whatever reason you cannot string together 3 hours and 15 minutes, in my opinion, the point in time where I would cut it off would be the guy sees the iceberg and he goes, there's an iceberg ahead. And that's where I would cut it off.
Cut it. Actually, I'm just remembering this now. My mom went and saw this in theaters with my dad, and she told me they actually had an intermission.
Really?
Just like Ben-Hur.
Interesting. Maybe I'll have to look that up online.
Yeah, because the version I watched, I didn't have an intermission, so I'm curious to see where they put it.
Yeah, so did I. But like I said, I think you and I are in agreement that you should watch this as one film. I think it fits as like a Sunday night kind of family film. It's not necessarily a family film, because I already said it's not really for kids, but
it's a good date night movie.
Kind of.
And I'm saying that because I watched it on a date.
Nice. Yeah, it's great. I think that is a good time to watch it on a date. So yeah, Jess and I really appreciated watching it together. I think you almost do have to watch it with somebody else as well, because there's so much like human emotion and trauma happening in it. You almost have to experience it with somebody else.
You almost need like a buffer between you and the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
exactly.
need someone else to suck up the excess emotions.
Yeah.
Actually, speaking of which, I do have a very pointed question for you, but I'm going to save it till the end.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. You know what? I might have the exact same question for you.
I don't think you do.
In terms of where Titanic is streaming right now, where to watch. So you can stream it on Crave Stars, which is like Stars attached to Crave, or you can do Stars, the add-on, through Amazon Prime. Alternatively, if you have the Paramount Plus subscription or Paramount Plus through Amazon Prime, you can watch it through there.
And I forgot I had a Paramount Plus subscription.
You do?
I rented it off YouTube.
Oh man, that's rough. You need to be using Just Watch. Like Jason and I have mentioned this so many times before, but this is how him and I find all of our movies now, is through Just Watch.
It's funny. I mentioned I watched this on a date.
Yeah.
I was pretty sure it was on Netflix because I was pretty sure I'd seen it there before. So I like booted it up and I'm like, oh, it's not here. And then
you panicked.
And then I improvised. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's the point in time where we cut her off and we say that, we've been as spoiler-free as possible. So if you haven't seen this movie, do yourself the service of going and checking this out.
If you're one of those socially inept weirdos like me who hasn't seen it, just go watch it. Cross off your list.
Yeah, it's great. I'm hoping to get at least 5 more watches out of it in my lifetime, probably.
That's fair.
So,
That's fair.
I think it's a once a decade kind of movie. It's not something you watch every weekend. Let's put it that way.
No, who has the emotional bandwidth for that?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so it's time to get into some spoiler talk. Where do you want to start when talking about this movie? Like, talk about some of the moments that appeal to you, like what worked, what didn't for you.
I will say, I mentioned earlier I had some grievances. So
yeah, let's hear those.
I'm going to air them now. I will say, so as previously said, this is essentially 2 movies kind of stapled together.
Right.
The first half is a romance and the second half is a disaster. I will say I actually really enjoyed the first half more than I enjoyed the second half.
Really?
Yeah, like when the ship started going down, I won't say it lost me, but I was a little less engaged.
Oh, really?
At least up until, I'd say from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours, I was maybe a bit less engaged. But then I came back around for the finale.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Where, again, I'm a big fan of disaster movies in the sense that, or like historical human disasters, and really interested in the human element of things. And so I was really interested in seeing, like, how is Cal going to respond, this wealthy man, to the situation? How is the captain of the ship respond to the situation? How are each of the characters individually and maybe as a mob? Like, there's all these elements happening, like the musicians playing till the end. Like there's all these human elements happening throughout this film, and the crazy thing is a lot of these smaller stories being told about the real people were actual things that happened that night.
Yeah, and that is kind of the mind-blowing part.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's some of those parts actually shine through a little bit more for me, and that and for me that's really important to the film. And I will say, this watch through, I did appreciate the first half way more than any previous watch through. I really was invested in the relationship of Jack and Rose and where things were heading. But the disaster element was crucial for me to watch this because I wanted to understand that night and what happened to those people. And in previous watches, I don't think I would have said that the first part was essential. And now that I'm mature and understand this movie as more than some of its parts, I think that without the romance element grounding it, I don't think this movie quite works as well as it could have if they had cut that or reduced that. So
yeah, and I do think that was quite masterful on James Cameron's part, is that he realized, I think this is a quote from him, like, you're not going to care about the ship sinking until you care about the ship. Why would you care about this ship unless you care about the people on board? And why would you care about the people on board unless you got attached to these 2 crazy kids? Yeah.
And so I'm going to actually bring up a TV series that I've probably brought up before on this podcast that does something really similar to this, is the show The Expanse, which is a sci-fi TV show. It's kind of similar in that it adds the human element to the disasters that happen. Like, it's it's a solar show based several hundred years in the future, so it's very sci-fi heavy. And so when a big event happens that changes the balance of the solar system at that point in time, or a big disaster happens, usually the episode after kind of deals with the more person-to-person human elements of that. And it's kind of like that saying where if one person dies, it's a tragedy, but if many people die, it's a statistic. Like,
absolutely, yeah.
So adding this grounded love story into this film is really what makes you care about everything else. Not to say that you don't care about all of the other characters and their fates on the Titanic that night, but it does kind of grounds you and kind of puts you in a place where you can say, like, these are my people, and I'm going to see how these people make their way through this scenario.
I really want these two kids to make it.
Yeah.
I got some writing advice a long time ago. For those of you who don't know, again, all of you, I do write novels on the side. And I got this advice almost 10 years ago where the person mentioned the first Avengers movie. There's a moment where somebody brings up that Loki has killed 78 people off screen. And it's kind of like, oh, okay. Like, you just kind of shrug. Then halfway through the movie, at the end of the second act, Loki kills Phil Coulson, likable side character Phil Coulson. He stabs him through the chest.
Right.
And then we're like, oh my God, like, Loki's a monster.
Yeah.
And it's that quote. I was going to bring that up. Like, one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic.
Yeah.
So the fact that James Cameron got us to care so much about Jack and Rose, and then the ship starts sinking around them, it's like, oh my God, it feels apocalyptic.
That's exactly what I was going to say as well. Like, this movie almost fits in the apocalypse genre, and it's because of that, the way he's portrayed the importance of their relationship. And it also, like, the ship itself is an ecosystem. It's large enough to have its own gravity, essentially. And so, like, you could almost slot this in, and I forgot I was going to say this, but you could almost slot this into, like, hey, I'm looking for, like, an apocalypse movie tonight, and I've got 3 hours. Like, I would watch this over 2012 any day.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Especially 2012. I don't care how many pickles Woody Harrelson's character eats.
That's awesome. What was the saddest part of the film for you? Like, what moment really hit you in the feels the most? This was my big question that I wanted to.
Oh, that was the pointed. Wait, that was the pointed question you were going to ask me?
Yeah. What was the biggest emotional impact you had on this film? Because this film tugs at the heartstrings in so many different ways and so many different characters and times.
What I was going to ask you later on, did you cry? And if so, at what point?
It was a similar question.
Okay. So we are on the same page. I think towards the end, I was really starting to, like, get misty-eyed. Like, I mean, obviously I know Jack dies. Like, everybody knows Jack dies, right?
Yep.
But when she sees the ship coming for them and she turns over and says, Jack, like, they're here, we're safe, and he's dead.
Yeah.
Like, he died.
And you already know.
He died holding her hand, and you kind of see, like, his chin rocking on the ballast or the flotsam they're on. That really got to me, but what really kind of made me shed tears was towards the end when Rose, now 104, looking back on everything, and she's talking about Jack, and she says, he saved me in every way a person can be saved, and I don't even have a picture of him. For some reason, that line, and I don't even have a picture of him, that made me shed some tears.
Yeah.
Just the I don't even know what to say, like, just the injustice of it all, maybe.
That moment is it's heartbreaking because you think of all the important family members that you have at that point in time, and, like, it makes you think about all the people that you maybe don't have in your life anymore, and how lucky you were to spend that time with them, but also like that you have the evidence of that as well. Like, having pictures are more important than you think sometimes in remembering someone.
I will also say the other thing that really made me shed extremely manly tears was the final shot where we have a big sweeping tracking shot on the wreck. It goes in through the windows. Suddenly it transitions into the Titanic back on its maiden voyage, spins around, They open the ballroom doors. Everyone who died on the Titanic is there. Jack is standing up on top of the stairs waiting for Rose. They embrace. That has to be one of the most moving, effective final shots I've ever seen in a movie.
I would completely agree with you. Like,
yeah.
the emotional weight of that, of her going home, cannot be understated in how important it is.
It's almost the classic, the whole Romeo and Juliet thing, will be together in death. It's essentially that taken to its logical conclusion.
Yeah, it feels it's the perfect way to end the movie.
Yeah,
it really is. And we'll talk about an alternate ending a little bit later. And I think they came up with the correct way to end this. The part that got me is actually not a part that you have actually mentioned. For me, the part that hits me like an absolute gut punch is when the band is playing together, and everybody's playing, and their purpose behind playing while the ship's going down, and basically everyone is panicking. Is they're just like, we just want people not to panic. Like we want to make people's final moments ease them through their final moments. And when the leader of the band looks at all of his bandmates and says, "Gentlemen, it has been a privilege playing with you tonight."
Yeah.
And they kind of wrap up and they walk away, and he stays there and he starts playing, and the rest of the bandmates turn around and they walk back and they come back and play with them. Like, it's making me a little emotional now to talk about it.
It is.
But
in the fact that actually happened.
That's what I was going to say too. Like at that moment while Jess started watching, like I'm sitting there like holding back tears, and Jess is like, I could cry right now. And I was like, same. And I was like, and the worst part is that this actually happened. Like these band members played until the very end. Like they stood there and that's a hero to me. They're heroes on that ship.
There's also that kind of moment where they briefly pause while playing, and one of them kind of makes a comment like, they're not even listening to us. And it's like, well, they never listened to us in the dining room either.
Yeah.
But then they kind of just agree, like, well, like, and then they just keep going. Like, they understand that what they're doing is important.
Yeah.
Like, it's a thankless job that maybe no one will remember, but they know it's important.
Yeah. And I remember them.
Yeah.
And I remember that part. And that is one of the saddest parts of the sinking of the Titanic for me. And I will always remember those people.
There was also that kind of mini montage towards the end where they show a bunch of different shots of all these different people at their final moments. And there's an old couple in bed together.
Yes.
There's a woman reading to her children. Like, I think that maybe more so than anything, that was kind of the moment where I was like, a lot of innocent people met their end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was nothing that could have been done. Like there was things that could have been done, but nothing. Like, it just, that's what happened. And those people, that couple, that actually did happen as well.
Oh, really?
That was the owners of the Macy's department store in New York.
Macy's.
Yeah,
All right.
So backstory behind that is she went to the boats. They said, you can come on. They said, your husband can't come with us. And she basically said, where you go, I go. And she turned away, and they died together on the boat. And that's where that line actually that Rose says came from, is from the memory of one of the survivors hearing her say that to her husband and leaving.
Well, now I'm getting emotional.
Yeah.
I watched an interview with James Cameron earlier today in preparation for this, where he told a story about, I guess maybe he would have been the richest man of America at that time. I forget the name. I don't think he was really mentioned. I think he was mentioned in the movie, but this part I'm about to tell you about wasn't actually in the final cut. I don't think. It was this really, 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 again, I think he would have been the richest man of America at the time. He would have been like 48 or something, and he had an 18-year-old bride.
Right. He was in the movie.
He was in the movie. Something Astor Williams, maybe?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyways, so this part, he was in the movie, but again, this part wasn't in the movie. But I guess he had this 18-year-old bride who he was madly in love with, and I think she was even pregnant. And they went to the boats together, and they basically said, your wife can get on the boat, but you can't. And he just went, okay, like, boop, put his wife on the boat, kissed her. That was it.
Yeah.
Just, richest man, one of the richest men in the world. He just, he loved his wife. He didn't complain. He was just like, all right, see ya. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's where James Cameron, I can really appreciate how much of himself he put into this movie. Like, he spent years researching for this movie. Like,
Oh, yeah.
he had a whole office built on like the history behind the Titanic. And so he actually took aside the 150 extras that they had on set during the sinking, who had those small roles, those human moments that we saw, and he took each and every one of them aside and said, "This is the passenger that you're playing.
Oh,
This
wow.
is their name. This is their story, who they were as a person, and these were what their final moments were. And this is what I need you to bring to this movie."
And I will say, as much, we've mentioned this before, as much historical accuracy as he brought to this movie, James Cameron is ultimately a filmmaker. So there were a few details he fudged just for the sake of drama. And I think perhaps the most controversial was the first mate who shot himself. Murdoch. I read somewhere that Murdoch's family, I guess Murdoch, again, he was the first mate. He shot while trying to keep order. He ended up shooting a passenger, and then in despair, he shot himself in the movie. And then in real life, that didn't happen. I'm not super sure what happened in real life, but it wasn't that.
It's not for sure known what happened to him in his last moments, but he did, from what we understand, try to keep order and try to get people onto the boats for as long as humanly possible.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is one moment where it was kind of that dramatic element that was added to the movie.
And as far as dramatic elements goes, I mean, it's definitely a very dramatic moment. Like,
Yeah.
I don't really blame him for putting that in there. But I think I read somewhere that the family complained, and James Cameron either set up a scholarship or donated some of the proceeds to the family.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like I think he regretted it after the fact.
Yeah, the last known survivor of the Titanic, who passed away in the early to mid 2000s, was actually invited to the screening of this film, like the opening screening.
Oh,
and,
no way.
She actually turned it down. She was only like a baby, like a few months old at this time.
Oh, okay.
But she actually turned it down still because she was like, this is way too traumatic for me to experience this. And
thanks, but no thanks.
exactly.
Like,
so
hey, Batman, we made a movie about your parents getting shot.
yeah, it's still a very tasteful film for the most part.
Yeah.
Like,
it certainly wasn't sensational or pornographic or anything like that.
like it wasn't trauma porn by any means. Like,
No.
I came out of that with a deep sense of sadness for the events of what happened.
Yeah. I think in terms of other historical things that were fudged, I did read that Mr. Mustache, the guy we were talking about,
Yes.
the owner of the company.
Yeah, the director of the company.
Yeah, in the movie, he was portrayed as a total twat. Like, he's extremely... There's a scene where he's urging the captain to go faster because he wants to beat the record or something.
Yeah.
I guess in real life, there's no evidence that he ever did anything like that. And I think some of the survivors even reported that, like, he was helping people towards the end.
Yeah.
And that he only got on the lifeboat because no other women or children were present.
Right.
So, I mean, again, it's great cinema, and he's a great... I mean, just that mustache alone is so sinister. I can't say enough about that mustache, but I don't mind James Cameron playing fast and loose with history in order to make a more compelling cinematic experience.
Yeah, like the small changes that he made. Maybe what I'll do is I'll compare this to the TV miniseries Chernobyl, which came out in the last 5 years. There were a couple of creative liberties that were made during the making of that. However, the big overarching story of what happened and the stories of the people and how their lives were affected largely stayed the same. So you still understood, you can still watch it and walk away understanding the people and the motivations and how they dealt with that situation, even despite just minor changes happening. And that's a very tasteful way to do things. And maybe I'll contradict that with the recent movie Blonde about Marilyn Monroe's life. I don't know if you've read or heard a lot about that.
No, I'm completely unfamiliar.
It's essentially, apparently, a 3-hour trauma porn movie about how horrible Marilyn Monroe's life is, and it does a complete disservice to her. Jason and I were both kind of looking forward to it because we spent the summer watching Marilyn Monroe movies for the podcast.
That's
and
right.
We were really
you guys
excited.
definitely did.
Yeah, and we were really excited about the film, and from everything I've read about it, like I have no interest in watching it at any point.
Oh,
in time,
really? It's
so.
that I'm. Well, even we were talking about biopics earlier. I know Bohemian Rhapsody, which I watched in theaters, and I enjoyed it quite a lot. I know even that, played fast and loose with history.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also shied away from like the more like controversial parts of Freddie Mercury's life. And I put that in asterisks because obviously in today's world, maybe a lot of that wasn't controversial or isn't controversial anymore.
Yeah, but I guess it's
it's again trying to appeal to everyone and everyone everywhere. There are certain countries and certain governments that if you want it to sell in those countries, you have to obviously play by their rules.
I didn't really think about it like that, but I know exactly what you mean. Well, I mean, I don't. You and I were talking about Nathan Fielder before we started recording, and how he's done these 2 shows, Nathan For You and The Rehearsal, and they're great shows. But it's also like the big question we have, and that everyone else has, is how much of this is orchestrated or scripted or manipulated. And
right.
I did go to film school. I did direct a documentary at one point, and the truth is, like, everything you're seeing on screen is going to be manipulated in some way, shape, or form. By telling a story, by pointing a camera at something, you're changing somebody's perspective.
Yeah.
Like, there's a famous quote by a Canadian documentarian whose name escapes me that, a documentary is a lie at 24 frames per second. So again, looping it back to these biopics and James Cameron and Titanic, it's like, ultimately, it's like the needs of the story will always supersede the needs of, the hardcore historical accuracy. Yeah. It's almost, this is a weird metaphor, but it's what's coming to mind. It's like that quote, right? Like embodying the spirit of the law, if not necessarily the letter of the law.
Yeah, I kind of know what you mean.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, I think we've gotten into the weeds of why we think that's important, or why sometimes it's okay, but it's also knowing when it's okay and when it isn't. Like if you're making a biopic and you change like key like importance, like if you made the Titanic a movie about how Cal crashed the boat because he was upset about Rose dipping on him, then clearly like that's gonna rub people the wrong way, right? And do a disservice to the history of what happened in that scene.
Honestly, Billy Zane plays such a cartoonish asshole that I'm surprised there isn't a deleted scene where he's blamed for the whole sinking of the Titanic. I will say, jumping ahead a bit, at the end of the movie, he survives, but he goes looking for Rose and he can't find her and he just wanders away. And then Rose, in voiceover, telling this story 84 years later, she just very offhandedly says, yeah, that's the last I ever saw of him. And then in the stock market crash in 1929, he put a gun in his mouth and shot himself, and that's it.
Yeah.
And it struck me as kind of funny that he's like essentially the real main villain of the movie, aside from the iceberg. And
right.
It's just, there's something so dismissive about like, yeah, anyways, he shot himself. All right, moving on.
Yeah.
Like, but at first I was like, that's kind of cheap. But then I thought about it. I'm like, it's almost kind of what he deserves in that it happens off screen and it's so unceremonious. It's just like, yeah, this asshole shoots himself like 15 years later. Don't worry about it.
Yeah,
anyways.
we're not glorifying the villain.
Yeah, it's almost this is a weird comparison, but I thought about it. Do you remember the train wreck that was Game of Thrones season 8?
Yeah.
I remember Cersei and Jaime die by hiding under the Red Keep, and rocks fall on top of them and they die. And that's obviously a really stupid way to kill your main villain. But I was talking to my friend Basil about it, and he said he actually appreciated it that after all the trouble Cersei caused, she just died a very inglorious, unceremonious death.
Right.
And he thought it was kind of fitting. And I didn't agree, but I see where he was coming from. So, like, Billy Zane just wandering off frame and the voiceover being like, yeah, he shoots himself. Don't worry about it. Never mind. Like,
yeah, like he's a bad guy, and you know it looks like he goes off to live this great life, but in the end, being a bad guy caught up with him.
It's almost like this movie is a real thesis for karma in a way.
Yeah,
it's like
bit.
Karma was waiting for this guy eventually.
Yeah,
so
it took a bit of time, but we got there. There's a couple other like historical similarities, differences that I do want to mention before we get out of here. They did only actually pull 5 people from the water. Because,
really?
Yeah, so many people died in the water that night because unless the boats were right there to pick them up, like the people, like you froze to death basically, like so quickly that you were dead within, I think I read 30 minutes, 10 to 30 minutes of being in that water was a death sentence.
There was that moment early on when Rose is threatening to jump off the bow and Leonardo is trying to talk her down and he's kind of just coyly being like, she's like, well, the fall would kill you. He's like, oh, it would definitely hurt.
Yeah.
He's like, it's the cold I'm worried about. Like like 1,000 knives hitting your skin, which was actually quite clever foreshadowing.
Yeah, true. And yeah, that's the reality is that, for example, Molly Brown herself, that scene where she tells the captain of their ship or of their lifeboat to turn around and go pick up the survivors, and he says no, that actually happened. Like he actually was like, we're not going to pick them up, it's us or them now, and I'm choosing us, basically. And that was a pretty common thread throughout, is they were afraid that if they went back to the survivors, that the survivors like out in the water would actually basically swarm the lifeboats and flip them and capsize and kill everybody.
Well, you hear about that happening with people who are drowning, and you saw that at one point in the movie where some guy was actually literally like holding a woman down so that he could hold himself upright.
And that's that panic that sets in when you're drowning. And that's the reality. Like that's something that I learned as when I went through lifeguard training, is that you know, you don't swim out to save the person, because there's stories of like 4-year-old girls drowning police officers because of that feeling of adrenaline when you start
fight or
drowning.
flight,
And the adrenaline kicks in and you're trying to survive no matter what. You go like, you're not thinking about anybody else. You're not like, that's not a person in front of you anymore. That is a way to survive, basically.
Yeah. And maybe this is getting a little philosophical, but like watching this movie towards the end, like it did kind of make me wonder, like it kind of makes you wonder, like, what would I do in this situation?
Absolutely it does.
I think like and I don't know, I'm pretty sure this is historically accurate. There was really only one captain who was like, all right, like get the women on that ship. Like we're going back. I think there was only the one guy who was brave enough to be like, all right, screw this, we're going back for them.
Yeah,
you know
there's maybe a couple, because like I said, there was only 5 people that ultimately were pulled from the water and lived.
And I mean, you know, the fact that you like to think that like in such a situation you'd be brave enough to be like, actually I'm gonna go help those people.
Yeah,
I hope
a lot of us would be just paralyzed with fear, and I fully believe that I would probably be one of those people paralyzed in fear.
We never find out.
Yeah, I can honestly say that I hope I never find out who I am.
Yeah, yeah. But, who honestly wants to know who they are deep down?
Yeah,
that's a terrible thing to know.
Exactly. So the death toll was just over 1,500 people out of the 2,200 people that hopped on the Titanic on its maiden voyage. So most of the people that were on that ship that night died.
Wow. I will say, again, I'm not super familiar with the history, but I did do a little bit of research for this episode. And I guess that in terms of, if you actually look at the history of shipwrecks, the fact that they got women and children, they pretty much prioritize women and children, is actually kind of rare. Like in most shipwrecks, it's a bloodbath and a free-for-all.
Yeah, the women and children code it's like a code that people have used in disasters in the past. And now it is a little bit ingrained in us as humans to think of like save the women and children first kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, when push comes to shove and it's survival, you might not be thinking about that as priority. You're probably thinking about number one.
I don't want to go in that water. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So the lifeboat situation was a fact that there was not enough lifeboats for everyone's. However, that was legal back then because these ships, like the Titanic, was considered unsinkable. Like they were truly thought that these massive ships could not be sank. And so the lifeboats weren't for like long-term survival. They were more for like something's wrong with the ship. We can't get it moving. Maybe it's sinking, whatever. There's another ship that's close enough that can come, and we're just going to use these lifeboats to ferry people between the ships until everybody's rescued. Those ships weren't meant to sustain life the way that they needed to in the Titanic in that situation. And that actually changed how lifeboats worked on these ships after this fact.
Well, I will say there is a ton of dramatic irony in the first half of the movie when I mentioned before there's that scene where Rose goes up to the shipwright or whatever and says, hey, there aren't enough lifeboats. He's like, oh, well, they were cluttering up the main bow, so we just got rid of them.
Yeah, like, the director.
Just the sheer arrogance on display in the first half of the movie. You're like, oh, dude, like, it's almost kind of satisfying when the ship starts sinking. You're like, yeah, there you go.
Yep.
Like,
idiot.
You tempted fate so many times.
Yeah. If you had said maybe a little less cocky.
Yeah.
But yeah, the last thing that I just want to mention, actually, there's two things that I want to mention before we move on. Things that didn't happen. They didn't lock the lower class below deck. That actually didn't happen. That was another plot device to make things a little bit more dramatic.
Interesting.
There was no classism that was really noted at the end when people were trying to get on ships. The priority was women and children. It wasn't women and children of first class. Like that was something that the movie played up for.
That actually makes me feel a little better.
Yeah, that was just a more of a plot device. The kind of interesting thought or fact about this, the length of the movie is 3 hours and 15 minutes, but if you look at the part of the movie that takes place in the past, if you take out the present day stuff, the past part of the movie takes place over 2 hours and 40 minutes, which is the exact length of the Titanic sinking.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
That is really, really cool.
So I believe it was 11:40 is when they hit the iceberg PM, and the final sinking when it's fully submerged was at 2:20 a.m.
Wow. Somebody, a YouTube comment I read said that final shot that I love so much when Rose reunites with Jack in the next world and he's standing by the clock, and somebody pointed out the clock is at 2:20. Yeah, that's a very nice touch.
Mm-hmm. So let's move into effects and filming. There's a lot to talk about here because, like you said, this film was so troubled in its production, and this really is James Cameron's movie. Like, he wrote it, he directed it, he edited it, I believe he produced it. Like, he had all of his hands in all of the cookie jars of this movie.
Linda Hamilton once pointed out, James Cameron has a bit of a reputation for being a tyrant on set, but she pointed out that, like, he can literally do everything. Like, he can wear all the hats. I think she said, like, the only thing he can't do is act. But, like, he can do everything else. Like, write, direct, edit, set design, like...
And that's amazing. That's just not something that many directors can do.
Like, he is, and again, I think this is the first movie that really made me respect him a lot more as a director. But, like, he is clearly a master of his craft.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Also, when the credits came up, I didn't realize he wrote the movie.
Yeah, this was his movie. So, and I'm going to get into the backstory of this actually now because I did find this quite interesting. So, James Cameron, the whole reason why this movie even was made was after the ship was found. I believe it was around 85 when they found the ship. After that, he wanted to do the dive. He was like, I need to go see the Titanic. And so the way he framed this to the studios was, I want to do a movie about the Titanic. I need footage of it at, like, the ship down at the bottom of the ocean for this movie, and I'm going myself to do it. And so James Cameron actually convinced the studio on that. They didn't even have a script at that point. Convinced the studio at that point to fund this project. And the studio also wanted to incentivize James Cameron to sign a deal with them because he was becoming this big director, and they wanted a cut of that action.
Sure.
So he actually did 12 dives down to the Titanic and shot the actual footage that they use, like with the Titanic down there, was real. Like that is the Titanic in the opening scenes of the movie.
You know, it's funny. I watched this movie on a date, as I mentioned, and those opening shots of the wreck, I said to my date, I was like, that's not the actual Titanic, is it?
Uh-huh.
And I was like, no way, it couldn't be. But then I started thinking, like, wait, when did they discover the wreck?
Yeah.
And then I was like, wait, didn't they just discover it like 5 years ago? And I looked it up. No, that's the actual wreck.
Yeah, it is the actual wreck, which I didn't actually realize until after I read it as well, because I've seen pictures of the Titanic. So I will say that I am also, I guess I've kind of mentioned this, that I'm fascinated by the story of the Titanic, but also about the story of other like natural disasters and shipping disasters of history. And so I've done a lot of research into the Titanic before. And so watching it this time, I was like, man, that looks exactly like what I've seen the Titanic look like down at the bottom of the ocean.
These effects are amazing.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And then I read that after, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like that is 100%. And James Cameron went down there, and those shots that we see are actually from the first time that they went down there.
Wow.
And he was like so blown away that when he got up there, like when he got back up, he burst into tears because he was like,
wow.
The feeling of the human tragedy hit him, and he was like, if I'm going to do this, like I really need to do this justice. And so they spent like years, like he spent years developing and reading and doing the backstory on this, and you got to give the man kudos. Like he knew the Titanic inside and out before he did this, and that shows very clearly in the presentation.
Yeah, there was I think I read somewhere today that at one point, because the movie went so over budget and so over time, they were threatening to like kick him off the movie. And he said something like, you know, you're going to have to kill me to get me off this movie or something like that.
He's like, you can't fire me.
Yeah.
I'm unfireable on this movie. I will not leave this production. This is my movie.
Yeah. And I mean, as an artist, I definitely respect that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like that's the same thing. You can compare that to Sylvester Stallone. Like his career would not have been the same if he hadn't have stuck to his guns and said, I've written Rocky and I'm starring in Rocky.
Yeah, like I am Rocky.
I am Rocky. Yeah.
Yeah.
So James Cameron is the Titanic.
Yeah. James Cameron is the Titanic.
He's unsinkable.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
We will see after Avatar 2, 3, 4, and 5 come out over the next 5 years.
Oh my God, is there 4 more?
Yeah. There's probably going to be 100 of them at this point. There's a couple of scenes that I want to mention. So the engine room scenes, when you watch that scenes, you're like, this is huge. Like the engine room looked massive.
Oh yeah.
And I was kind of astounded, like how did they make this look so big? And they actually, all of the stuntmen that they cast for the scenes that were in the engine room were only 5 feet tall. So they actually used height differences to make the whole room look bigger. And they used mirrors. So they put mirrors on either end. So it looked like it went on forever, but it was just like a mirroring of like everything that we're looking at basically. So it was some really cool like camera techniques that they used to make it look bigger than it was.
See, this was like the golden age before VFX.
Yes.
When like they actually had to use like smoke and mirrors.
Well, this is around the time of CGI. Like this is what did I say? 98?
97.
97, yeah. So at this point in time, CGI has kind of started, and this is where I always say like around this time period, if it's a heavily CGI'd movie, I'm probably not going to enjoy the special effects. And James Cameron at this time was like, I do not want to rely on special effects for this film. They did use some CGI in some moments, but I think they used it enough that you almost can't tell when the CGI is happening.
Because CGI from that time period is super obvious now, but I didn't really notice anything.
Yeah. Like a big example is like when the people are falling off of the ship when it's sinking, like when it's pointed straight up.
Oh yeah,
that was all CGI.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and the people falling there, because actually, funny enough, he did try to do that in real life. Like he tried to shoot those scenes, but so many people were so injured off that he said, we can't do this. I can't have this. So that even that part he was trying to make like
James
real.
Cameron was literally throwing people off the Titanic.
Exactly.
Trying to film his movie.
So another size thing that I find kind of funny is the grand staircase, that beautiful grand staircase.
Oh, yeah.
They made that is the grand staircase from the Titanic. Like if you look at the images of what the Titanic looked like back then, like James Cameron meticulously looked at any piece of photography. Like honestly, go look up the Titanic images after this. He like that scene of the grand staircase, like the dining scenes, like everything is exactly how it was on the Titanic at that point in time. The only difference with this grand staircase is he actually made it 30% bigger because people at that time were shorter on average. So he wanted to make it feel as grand, but if they had used the same measurements as today with how tall the average person is today, it wouldn't have looked as grand as it does.
So if I was walking around, I'd be like, it's not that tall.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of interesting.
What is the height difference between like the 1900s and now?
Probably 3 inches, I would guess. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know for a fact. Like that's pure guess, but I would guess probably 2 to 3 inches. I would guess early 1900s it was probably 5'7", whereas the average today is like 5'9" to 5'10".
That actually does make sense.
So,
okay.
2 to 3 is my guess. The scene where Jack and Rose meet to thank, like where Rose wants to thank him like formally, the bulk of that scene was improvised. Like James Cameron was like, you two just have a conversation about your lives and how appreciative you are, and
just go nuts.
Yeah, and so like it was kind of awkward but also like well done kind of thing, right? And so that was the natural discussion that those two had together to kind of get that scene together, as well as like the spitting part where he teaches her how to spit like a man. That was actually heavily improvised as well, and it comes back later, right, when
she
Rose
spits in his face.
it spits in Cal's face. And so even that moment was actually changed. Like she was actually supposed to like poke him with a stick or something like that, but the spitting is so much more effective, especially with the callback, right?
Well, I mean, especially now in our post-COVID days, like there's something very vicious about spitting in someone's face.
It's pretty gross, yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
gross.
Come on. But I did genuinely buy the romance between these two.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was 100% on board with it. Like, I totally believed that these two would fall in love.
Well, and like you said too, like that quote where Rose said, he saved me in every way that a person can save another person.
Yeah.
Is Rose was ready to kill herself. Like she was at that point, and that closing shot when you see Rose's life in those photographs beside her bed, like you go on and you think like Jack really did save her life and change the trajectory of where she was heading, and she got to be the person that she was. And that's honestly what the elements of the Titanic are always going to be important for me as like the historian element that I really enjoy for it. But like now watching this movie and appreciating that element, seeing Rose get to be the person that she was, I really appreciate.
One of my pet peeves in fiction is I feel like in a lot of works of fiction, whether it's, I won't even name names because there's too many to count. But there's this trope of like, there's a brooding, kind of dark, morally ambiguous man and a beautiful, pure, usually blonde woman who sort of redeems him through her love.
Right.
And it's a trope that shows up a lot. And like, I'm sure it's been done well at different points, but for me as an adult, it always rings hollow to me. This idea that like, I'm a brooding man and nobody understands my pain. And then this woman comes in and just like, makes him a better person through her unconditional, pure, angelic love. It always rings hollow to me. But what's interesting is that this is essentially kind of almost a gender inverted version of that.
Right.
And what's funny is that I kind of buy the gender inverted version.
Yeah.
It seems less condescending than the, nobody understands me, I'm Batman, Christian Grey, whatever. And then
I think it's a little bit a sign of the times, like the time period in which this takes place. Like Rose is trapped she's not allowed to make the decisions that she wants to make. Like, she is boxed in to be the wife of a rich man and show up to the parties and hang off of her husband, and it is her duty to be the wife and until basically he goes off for his smoke after dinner with the rest of the men.
The movie does such a good job of showing that Rose is actually extremely intelligent.
Yeah,
and having to
and adventurous.
Yeah, it's like having to stay quiet and dumb herself down just for, Hal and his stupid hairline. Like, it's, yeah, you could see how crushing that would be to her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's that kind of victorious moment for how sad the tragedy of the Titanic is. There is a little bit of that. It's bittersweet almost because Rose and Jack don't get to have a life together, but it's also like Rose gets to have the life that she deserved and she took for herself. Like she finally figured it out, like what she wanted to be, and she was given the opportunity to be that person, and she took it. When
she talks about having sex with Jack in the car, which, by the way, was the origin of Dirty Mike and the Boys. That's an Other Guys joke for those of you listening. When she talks about having sex with Jack in the car, and she mentions, like, it was the most erotic moment of my life so far.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, I was sitting there, I'm like, good for you, Rose.
Yeah.
Like, you had good sex throughout your life. Like,
yeah.
I'm proud of you. Like, you deserve it.
It was a really great moment. And like, and if you think about the tragedy of everything that happened that she had told to everybody, like everybody there hearing her story was like
moved
by her story. And so to give them that little bit of like relief as well, and give us, the audience, a little bit of relief of like, there was something good that happened in all of this. All right, let's move back to some of the effects and filming again.
We got a little off topic.
I have a couple more things that I did want to mention. So the ocean. So most of the ocean that the extras were like jumping into, that like during the scenes where everybody was trying to get off the ship, was only 3 feet deep, except for an area basically that was really deep, so that they were basically told like, you have to jump into this area. So the way that they did it with the extras is you jumped into that area, and then there was debris like chairs and stuff that were kind of stationed around that area. So that was the 3 feet deep area. So basically what you did was you jumped into the deep area, and then you swam over to the shallow parts that were only 3 feet deep, and then you just kind of like sat in there and like hunkered in basically.
Interesting.
And on that note as well, you said how much of maybe a hard ass James Cameron is on set. He actually threatened to fire anyone who would get out of the tank for any reason, even if it was a bathroom break, while they were shooting those scenes, like the lifeboat scenes, and while everybody was in the water. So a lot of the actors actually said that they actually peed in the water while they were acting. Both Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio admitted to doing that.
So it was a community pool.
Yeah,
essentially.
It was a community pool.
I respect that.
It was a really massive set that they were using, right? Because they had like, I can't remember the scale of the size of the ship, but they almost had like a 2 scale size of the Titanic.
I think in the interview I watched with James Cameron today, he said it was like a 3/4 size model.
It was huge.
Yeah.
Like, and they had that in the tank with them, right? And acting those scenes out is crazy. And they made it big enough as well that they could lift it and lower it into the water. So those scenes where you see the water rushing in, they're like, they've actually submerged it at that point in time, which is crazy thinking about like the amount of effects that they went into like designing those scenes, right?
I think I read something where Billy Zane said something like, when the ship started sinking, quote unquote, like there was a genuine palpable sense of terror. Like you could almost believe you were in a ship that was going down.
I believe it. Yeah. I couldn't imagine even just being on set of that. Like it would have been crazy. Yeah. Okay, we got to move on here. I've got one other comment that I want to make about the alternative ending to the film.
Okay.
The alternative ending, Bill Paxton's character was actually supposed to catch the old Rose before she throws the heart of the ocean into the ocean. And in that moment, she reveals that she never actually sold it because she didn't want to live off of Cal's money, but she kept it all of those years. And so basically the ending was that after accepting that the treasure is worthless, Brock laughs at his stupidity, and then she throws it back in and Rose goes to sleep, and then we get like the original ending. So they cut that down. When they got to editing all of that, James Cameron realized that like the audience wouldn't care at that point. Like that there's no, at this point, like the story of Bill Paxton's character is like so far behind this that like we don't care about that anymore.
It's like an afterthought.
Yeah, exactly. Like thinking about this movie and thinking about the beginning, like every time I watch this, I'm sure 5-10 years from now when I watch this movie again, I'm gonna go, oh yeah, Bill Paxton's in this. Just like I did again, because like it really just becomes like, you know, a little bit of plot device to get the story going, and that's it.
It's a very effective framing device, but it's clearly, I think it was very wise to start with the wreck. And like there's even that moment where the beardy guy is explaining what happened and how the ship crashed.
Right.
And it's getting that information out of the way so that we don't have to pause during the big dramatic moments.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And even Bill Paxton's character has a little bit of a character arc where he kind of says to the granddaughter, like, oh, this time, like these last 3 years, I never let it in.
Yeah.
And it's a little cheesy and a little hokey, but like it works.
Yeah,
it totally works.
And it's just enough. And the other point to this was as well is Cameron realized that, you know, you don't want to disrupt us, the audience's melancholy that we have for the Titanic sinking. Like it would have taken away from everything that we had just watched over the last hour of the film.
I'm picturing that scene in my head, and it's so much less effective than what we actually got.
Absolutely. And the only point that I can make that I actually think adds to my understanding of the film, and maybe something I didn't think about, is how she never sold it. Like I did think about the fact that she never sold it or used it, but basically as one last like throwing in Cal's face to like not even live off of something that he would have provided to her is and how important that is to her as the character of Rose is, I think it's really touching. But as an audience, I think you either infer it, which I maybe a little bit inferred, but also didn't really think about too hard, or you don't. And either way, I don't think that significantly impacts your viewing of the film.
Yeah, like your enjoyment of it. I mean,
exactly.
The Heart of the Ocean or whatever it's called, it's almost kind of just like a MacGuffin or an afterthought anyway. Like I didn't really think too much about it. Like it's clearly what Brock is after.
Right.
But I mean, like you said, by the end of the movie, like it's Brock, who cares? Like he's pretty far in our rearview mirror, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, Bill Paxton, but it's true.
Yeah. Score. You're somebody who said before that you don't necessarily notice scores, but what about this one?
Are we talking about the Celine Dion song?
I'm talking about all of it, and you can also rope Celine Dion's song at the end into it.
I will say that freaking Celine Dion song, I've probably listened to it like 20 times this week.
Yeah.
And you know what? It deserved to win the Oscar that year. It is a genuinely good song, especially with this movie.
And you can understand why people would have been angry about a year after this movie came out, because that song would have been playing everywhere, right? People would have definitely been sick of it and been sick of thinking about the Titanic. And that's maybe one of those knocks of like, it was too successful for its own good.
It's kind of funny how there's this threshold where it's like, you know, you're successful, but then it's almost like there's this moment where once you pass it, it's like, oh, now you're too successful.
Yeah,
we hate you again.
The movie's great, but it's when you it's at the but phase of
it's almost like Let It Go from Frozen.
Yeah,
like I remember it reached.
It's a weird comparison.
Well, I mean,
you can run with it. I'm here.
I never saw that movie actually up until not that long ago, but like it came out in like December of 2013. And everybody loved it. But then 2 months later, I remember people being like, I am so sick of that song. Like, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's funny how people's goodwill is infinite until it's not.
Exactly. And I think that actually did the movie a disservice in the long-term outlook of this movie. Because you and I, obviously, I think we're both going to say we really enjoyed this film
yes.
when we get to our personal reviews. And so if you look back at the times, like, I think after a certain period of time, audiences would have been, their patience would have been worn down by some of the constant in your face Titanic is great and don't forget that and buy more tickets and buy all of our score, our film soundtrack.
I will say, I actually do have a funny story about this. So, like I said, you and I would have been 5 when this movie came out, but this movie was in theaters for 9 months. Mm-hmm. And I remember when it was first announced, my mother saying to my dad, why the heck would I want to go see a movie about a ship that sinks, especially when I already know how it ends, right? But then again, it was in theaters for 9 months. So like a few months later, she was finally like, all right, I guess we should go see it. And so she got me and my sister a sitter for the night. Mm-hmm. She and my dad went out to see it and she loved it.
Yeah.
And then she bought the official soundtrack, and I still remember hearing that song in the car when my mom was driving.
Wow.
So
that's hilarious.
Yeah.
The score overall, like, just go over Celine Dion's part in all of this, is composed by James Horner, who this is legitimately the best selling orchestral film soundtrack of all time, any movie. He also scored Avatar, Aliens, so the connection James Cameron.
So they've worked together.
Yeah, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Field of Dreams, and Braveheart. Scored all of those films.
Okay, they're getting a little more random as the list goes on.
But very important to film composing history. Those are all great movies. For Titanic, the score does a really great job of matching the tone of every part of the movie, because at first, if you think about it, like the opening shots of the Titanic, not the movie Titanic, but like while everybody's getting on the ship, there's that sense of like adventure and awe over
whimsy.
This massive ship and like its maiden voyage, and we're here at this historic moment in time when the ship is about to leave the dock for the first time. And then we move into like the romantic moments, and like the score gets a little bit more soft and emotional, and then things pick up again when you get into like the ship is sinking now, and everybody is panicking, and things get crazy, and the music reflects that. And then finally, like near the end, when the reeds kind of start playing, when that score like is just kind of in the background, kind of like, you know, floating through the wind after this tragedy has happened, and you're sitting there kind of, I guess, sitting there and reflecting on everything that you watched, like, and that's part of what that score does is just helps you sit there and quietly reflect on this disaster and what happened.
I will say I didn't pay much attention to the score, but I think that's usually a good sign. Like if you don't really notice the score that much, it means it's doing its job.
Yeah, and so for me, like I do really focus on the score often, and I have a bone to pick with Tenet, which maybe you and I will talk about later.
Okay.
About the score of Tenet. But for this, like this is a 10 out of 10 score-wise for me. I honestly couldn't tell you many other movies that do the score better than this film.
I agree. I think even the freaking Celine Dion song, I think it's the perfect song for this movie and this story.
And funny enough, James Horner was given clear instructions by James Cameron. You do not put any lyrics in this film. I do not want this film ruined by lyrics. And James Horner in secret went to Celine Dion and was like, I need you to record this. I think I have something here. Like he wrote all of this for her.
Oh, really?
And he was like, please do this for me. And so he waited until he thought that James Cameron was in a good mood, and he like basically like dropped
James.
this on him.
Yeah,
he dropped this on him, and he played it over and over again. And James Cameron was like, yeah, I think you actually have something here. Let's add it to the end.
I love that.
Yeah.
So much initiative.
Yeah, 100%. Sometimes you got to stick to your guns. When you know something's right, you just got to go with it.
Sometimes you just got to go behind someone's back.
Yeah. So we already talked a little bit about a look at the times and what the atmosphere was like when this movie came out, and how impactful it was, and the fact that it was in theaters for that long. Like, it was still in theaters at the time that the VHS was released.
I remember it was the same thing with Avatar. Like,
Yeah.
the DVD came out and it was still in theaters.
Yeah, I mean, Avatar is still playing in theaters today.
Oh, yeah. Like, there you go. 14 years later.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question. Did you look at the movie poster for the Titanic at all? Like, when you were looking this up? You must have seen it, right? Like,
I've seen the poster.
yeah, with Jack and
Jack
Kate.
and Rose.
Yeah,
and
Rose.
the ship underneath them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty iconic poster.
Yeah. Do you think that it does a disservice to this movie at all? Do you think it's perfect? Do you give it a 10 out of 10?
I don't know if it's a 10 out of 10, but I also don't know that I could come up with something better, especially with 2 Guinnesses floating in my system.
That's fair.
Well, here, let me turn this question back around on you. What do you think this poster does not do correctly?
I think it makes the movie look like a pure romance film. Like, I think it really hammers home the fact that this is Jack and Rose's story, and James Cameron himself elevated this film to be so much more. And like you said, like, the main protagonist of this film is Rose and Rose's story, and by the end of it, that's what I cared about. Like, did Rose go on to live the life that she wanted and that Jack was able to, like, basically give her their perspective on? And I think that the film, or the way that the poster makes it look like, is that it's this grand epic romance, but there's just so much more to the movie, and I don't know how you show that on a poster.
I think I agree with what you're saying, but I think that if you rip this movie's chest open, its beating heart is that romance.
It is, but it's also, I don't want to just, like, put it down to, like, this is the story of how Jack and Rose fell in love. It's because it's more than that. This is the story of how Rose became the person that she is, and how she embraced life, and how the impact of the Titanic affected her, and these few days with this character of Jack changed everything. And I know that that's the romantic element, but I don't know how to do it better, but I just think that if it wasn't me and you, and we weren't looking at this as, like, a film to do for the podcast, that if I was scrolling through movies on Netflix and I saw the poster of the Titanic, I might not click on it based on the poster alone.
It might just not be our demographic.
Yeah, it might not appeal to me.
And wasn't that kind of maybe something that was happening behind the scenes at the time, is they were worried that it was just kind of a teenage girl movie?
Yeah.
And they were like, well, how do we, I think that was the problem the studio had. It's like, well, how do we market this to, everybody as opposed to just teenage girls? No, I do think the poster is pretty damn effective.
It's iconic, but
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it doesn't quite so as well with me. Anyway, let's talk legacy a little bit. So, this is the first film to make over $1 billion at the box office.
That's right.
And it was the only until Avatar came out years later, another James Cameron movie.
There you go.
Mythbusters dedicated a whole episode to the Titanic, and they proved that Jack could have gotten on the door. And James Cameron actually appeared in the episode to discuss it with them. And it was actually really funny. I was rewatching the clip today, and they basically, like, sat him down. They're like, hey, like, we've done the research, and Jack could have survived if they had just been smart about how they, like, got on that together. And as long as they kind of held their bodies up over the water a bit, they would have been fine. They wouldn't have died of hypothermia together. And James Cameron was like, well, yeah, but also the script called for Jack to die, and Jack needed to die. and I was like, that is true. And
the script says he dies.
And that's one of those arguments that people have, right? Is, like, this movie isn't great because they just conveniently had Jack die. And it's like, but he needed to die.
It's like the Eagles in Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah.
It's the most common sticking point for people, but it's also, like, it's such a stupid criticism when you get right down to it.
Yeah. It's like
like, have you seen a movie? Do you know how stories are told? Like, this guy needs to die. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like,
also, I'm pretty sure there's a moment where, like, they both try to get on the door and it flips over.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
So,
if they're panicking, right?
Yeah.
Like they're in the freezing cold ocean. You can't see anything because it's pitch black at that point, and all you hear is screaming people.
yeah.
So-
So that's always been like, even again, as someone who hadn't seen the movie until now, that was always the big joke of the movie. It's like, oh, Jack could have survived. Like, move over, Kate. Ha,
Yeah.
ha, ha, ha. But
Yeah, this movie is the movie that made Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet like major Hollywood stars. Like Leo's definitely one of my favorite actors of all time.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was actually looking at his filmography of the last 20 years, and I've seen about 80% of his movies that have come out in the last 20 years.
he's, especially in the last 10 years, I feel like he's done a lot of great stuff.
Yeah, and so I was reading a story, funny enough, and I can't believe that this ended up relating to today, but I was reading an article in GQ about Christian Bale today. He had like an interview with GQ magazine, and he basically said that like every big film in Hollywood today goes to Leonardo DiCaprio first, and he gets to choose which movies he starred in or which movie he stars in Hollywood, and how basically like nowadays you almost get your big breaks now, or you get your breaks as like just under Leo by Leo turning down roles. Like,
Yeah, it's funny how that happens, right? I remember William Goldman writing about that in Adventures of the Screen Trade. The fact that like sometimes these young actors get their big breaks because some other more iconic actor didn't feel like doing it.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so Christian Bale himself, I was reading about this too, and this is how it comes back, is he actually auditioned for the role of Jack, and Cameron basically turned him down because he didn't want another British lead playing another
remember
American.
reading that. Yeah.
And so it's funny because that's actually one criticism. It's a very small criticism that I have, is that Kate Winslet has a really bad American accent. And so
Does she?
Yeah, so she's plays an American in the film, and when I actually was writing up my notes, I actually put her as a rich British citizen, and then as I was reading, I was like, oh wait, she was cast as an American, and I was
Whoops.
like, oh yeah, and then that's actually one comment that she had, is she reflecting on the movie, she's like, I wish my accent was better, which is funny because it is something that I legitimately thought she was British in the film.
I must have a bad ear for accents because that completely passed me by.
Yeah.
I didn't even know she was British.
Yeah,
Really?
So that it's just a small thing that I noticed. The role of Jack almost also went to
Johnny Depp?
Johnny Depp. Yes,
I heard that as well.
and it's maybe one of his biggest. Like he said, it's one of his bigger regrets in filmmaking is that he passed on that role.
Well, then he made up for it by like the 5 Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Yeah, monetarily, absolutely.
Yeah. He decided he wasn't gonna let another ship movie pass him by.
And that so that piece of wood that Rose was floating on, I just wanted to bring this up as a historical fact, is based on like an actual piece of the Titanic that basically floated away from the ship sinking, and it's actually on display at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, which is in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So if you're ever in Halifax, and the eastern coast of Canada is absolutely beautiful, so I'd recommend going out there. So maybe make a stop there and see that, as well as some of the other artifacts that are in there.
Tell them that we sent you at Vintage Cinema Rewind.
Yeah.
gotta get the name out.
Yeah, exactly. So sequels, prequels, and reboots. So this movie should never be remade. This is perfect the way it is.
It's like Casablanca or the original Star Wars.
Yeah,
don't touch it.
Yeah, you don't need to. You never need to remake this. It is perfect. The effects hold up today. Like you said, you couldn't even tell where the CGI was because it's done so well and so tastefully. However, what I will say is there's actually an original film. The story of the Titanic's been popular for the last 100 years.
Oh yeah, I think there's been like what, 2 or 3 other Titanic movies?
Yeah, and some TV miniseries as well. The one
Yeah.
that I wanted to note for anybody who's interested in some extra watching is A Night to Remember, which is the 1958 British film.
Yeah.
It's actually considered to be the most accurate portrayal of what happened during the night of the Titanic sinking.
even more accurate than this one?
Even more accurate than this one.
Interesting.
So it is something that I will probably watch at some point. I'm actually kind of looking forward to it now that I've finally pinpointed what it was called. And maybe we'll do it on this podcast in like a year or two.
I think there was also a TV miniseries with Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Yes, I believe
maybe
so.
even a few years before this movie.
But yeah, The Night to Remember is the one to remember, and if you want to check it out, like an old movie that is covering something historic, then that's the one I'd recommend.
To me, it's like Jaws and shark movies. It's like, why would you ever bother making a shark movie after Jaws?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
If it's widely considered to be one of the best of all time, like why would you try to remake it?
Like actually, here's an interesting thought experiment. If a new studio and a new filmmaker came out tomorrow and said, we're making a Titanic movie and it's gonna be our take on Titanic, how would people react? It would be like, why bother, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with like the Ben-Hur remake that came out like 10 to 15 years ago.
Oh yeah.
Like
I
people
forgot
are
about
just
that.
like, why? Like it's perfect. It's a perfect movie.
It's almost all right, not to be too topical. It's almost kind of those it's like those live action Disney remakes. It's like
Exactly.
It's like you already got it right the first time.
It's just a cash grab at that point. And so if there's no purpose to a movie's existence beyond making money, then why are you doing it? Like
for money.
Yeah, audience. Yeah, exactly. And as an audience, we don't necessarily care about that. Although I will say that with an asterisk, because obviously some major studios like Disney have figured out how to capitalize on that and tell not necessarily the exact same story, but an origin story of a superhero time and time again, and making money off of that. So
you're talking out your butt. Disney never does that.
Yeah. So
actually, unrelated, Moon Knight wasn't bad.
Cool.
Yep.
The other thing that I wanted to mention actually is if you want to see like the most accurate portrayal of what happened the night of the Titanic, there's a 2 hour and 40-minute video on YouTube that I've watched one night when I couldn't sleep. I ended up starting it and then couldn't stop. It's like a video rendition, like you just see the ship, like not a cartoon.
Is it like a 3D rendering?
Yeah, like a 3D rendering
of
of the ship.
Yeah.
And so it's basically like plays the music like of like, you know, when the musicians are playing, like you can hear them playing. Pretty disturbingly, you can hear those people screaming when the people are supposed to be screaming during it. But like it gives you like the facts of like, here's what this happened, and then this person did this, and then like at this point in time the ship was at this level of sinking, and like you can see it like portrayed on the 3D rendering of it. And so if you're really, really interested in like understanding the big picture of what happened and looking for that really historical look at the sinking of the Titanic, I recommend watching it because it was really fascinating when I watched it.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, let's get to our personal review and the partner factor.
Okay.
First viewing, what do you think?
First viewing, like I said, I enjoyed the first half more than I enjoyed the second half. Mm-hmm. All the drama with the ship sinking kind of lost me a little bit. I will say towards the end, I came back around and I shed some testosterone-filled tears towards the end. Yeah, I was probably more invested in the love story than I was in the ship sinking. But I mean, that did make what inevitably happened more tragic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, you know what? Probably the most accurate summation of this movie is Romeo and Juliet on a boat.
Do you think this is one of the greatest films ever made?
I think from a technical level, yes, it probably is. Mm-hmm. Would I put this movie in like my top 20 or my top 30 or my top 40? Probably not. But in terms of American cinema and Hollywood and spectacle and technical prowess, yeah, it's probably up there.
I think this is one of the greatest movies ever made.
Okay.
And if you were to make a list of the top 100 most important films that have ever been made, I think the Titanic deserves a spot.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that it's my favorite movie of all time. I actually kind of agree with you that it wouldn't make my top 20 list.
Well,
it would be in the top 50, I think.
Well, and again, not to belabor the point, but experiencing this movie now, like 25 years after it made waves, pun intended, is almost kind of an awkward situation to be in because, like I said, I haven't seen this movie until the other night, but its main moments have been parodied and made fun of. And like they're so iconic that it's reached beyond the silver screen and has hit me already.
Yeah.
Like Rose on the door, Jack sinking beneath the waves, like the ship going ass over tea kettle. Like, I'd never seen the movie, but I knew all those things happened.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just because of how iconic this movie is.
Yeah,
So,
it's exactly it.
in a way, it's kind of like what we were saying earlier. It's almost like a movie being too successful almost kind of can hurt
To its detriment.
To its detriment, yeah.
Yeah, and I fully agree with that. And that's, I think, why I don't think it's in the top 250 movie list on IMDb. And I think that is the problem, is because it became so big that the butts started happening.
Yeah.
And that's where it fell out of that. But I think if you were to make a top 100, these are the most important films of humanity, this is one of them.
And absolutely. And like I said earlier, this is the kind of movie, this is the kind of experience that only Hollywood can give you.
Absolutely.
This is the kind of experience that only a master craftsman given $200 million can give you.
Yeah. I fully agree. And the other thought that I had when I was kind of wrapping up and reflecting on viewing this is that the movie basically taps into the feeling of a sad ballad. Like,
yeah,
it's basically a sad ballad portrayed on screen, and everybody can relate to a sad ballad, basically.
The sense of...
It's almost like longing, like that pit in your stomach, or that empathy that you get when something tragic happens.
Yeah, and something so calamitous on such a grand scale. It's almost, I'm saying this half facetiously, but I'm almost kind of surprised the studio didn't pull James Cameron aside and be like, are you sure they can't like get away, like, you know, have a happy ending? You know what, I'm sure that happened at some point and James Cameron told them to F off, but yeah,
I find it very funny that you and I actually landed on the same page on this one.
Yeah, for once in our lives, we're finally agreeing on something.
Yeah. But yeah, one of the greatest films ever made. Not necessarily one of our favorite of all time. I think, though, if I really think hard on this, I think that in terms of pure enjoyment, I think When Harry Met Sally is probably my favorite romantic comedy of all the time. And so if you just say the romance genre, so if you were to rope that in, I would say that probably does go on my top 30 list of my favorite movies of all time. And this one probably falls out of it a little bit. But this is probably my favorite disaster movie of all time.
Oh, 100%. This is easily, and I mean, it's almost a disservice to call it a disaster movie, but it is clearly...
It's apocalyptic, not in scale, but in feeling. This movie does apocalypse better than a lot of apocalypse movies do. Yeah,
absolutely. So, yes, it's a disservice to call it just a disaster movie, but as far as disaster movies go, you don't really get much better than this.
Yeah, and Jess really enjoyed this one as well. I don't know if you watched this one with Penn or not, but...
I watched it on a date.
Oh, yeah, you watched it on a date, right. What did your date say?
No, she actually she had work in the morning, so she kind of had to clock out 2 hours in.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, so I watched the final...
Well, that also impacted your viewing experience, too.
Yeah, maybe that's why I was crying. But, you know what? I don't know how much... I think she was a little lukewarm on it.
Yeah?
Now that I'm being honest, if I'm being honest, I don't think she was all that invested in what was going on, but I was very invested.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Has she seen it before?
I think she was in the same boat as me.
Oh.
Again, I got all the puns tonight, but yeah, she wasn't really all that cool with it. Huh.
Otherwise, I think that's it. It was a great conversation. The Titanic was awesome, and I'm so glad that we rewatched it because I probably wouldn't have rewatched it anytime soon.
I do have a final statement. This movie just turned 25, so Leonardo Dicaprio can't rewatch it.
Nice. All right. Great way to end it. Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome.
See you all later.